MBA Research and Curriculum Center is proud to present this video series on ethical principles, brought to you by the Daniels Fund Ethics Initiative. You can find timestamps, links, and more in the video description box below. Subscribe to our channel to stay up to date with all of our content. This video will cover the 8th and final ethical principle of viability. First, let's explore our ethics dictionary. Viability is defined as the long-term value of your choices and actions. It comes from the French root word viabilité, which means capable of life. Let's look at some words that are alike and different. First are synonyms, or words that are very close in meaning. Some synonyms of viability are feasibility, sustainability, and growth. Next are antonyms, or words that are opposite in meaning. Some antonyms of viability are inactivity, indifference, and short-sightedness. American author and activist Wendell Berry said, "A viable neighborhood is a community, and a viable community is made up of neighbors who cherish and protect what they have in common." Building blocks are the traits that a person needs to have in order to act ethically. Each ethical principle has its own set of traits. What building blocks are associated with this principle? Viability's first building block is observation. Highly observational people take careful notice of the world around them and draw conclusions based on what they perceive. You might hear someone say, "I did a double take," meaning they initially didn't notice everything in a surprising or unusual situation. Observation is connected to the immediate outcomes of your decisions. These are negative consequences or positive benefits that will quickly become apparent to you once you make your decision. Let's look at an example. Have you ever heard of situational awareness? It refers to observing or knowing what is going on around you and responding accordingly. Many workplaces emphasize situational awareness so that employees can anticipate injuries and hazards and prevent them from occurring. Think about what would happen if a grocery store didn't put out absorbent floor mats on a rainy day. Customers would drip water on the floor from their shoes and clothes. Eventually, someone might slip and fall. An observant store manager takes appropriate precautions to prevent such accidents. Viability's second building block is foresight. People who possess foresight have an ability to predict or prepare for what will happen in the future. You may have heard the phrase, "let's plan ahead," meaning that it would be beneficial to consider the future when deciding what to do. Foresight is connected to the long-term outcomes of your decisions. These outcomes might not be immediately apparent when you make a decision, but will come to impact you in the future. If you are able to foresee any negative consequences or positive benefits, you'll be better prepared to make your decision. Let's look at an example. Have you ever participated in cooking a multi-course meal, such as a Thanksgiving dinner? If so, you probably are aware of just how much preparation and thought goes into the cooking process. Not only do you have to shop in advance for all of the ingredients, you also need to put a lot of effort into planning out the times for cooking each dish. For instance, a frozen turkey could take hours to defrost, so that usually begins the night before the big meal. On Thanksgiving Day, the cooks will have to juggle preparing multiple dishes at the same time, on the same stove and oven, a process that only runs smoothly if foresight is used. How do the building blocks of viability work together? Can you have one without the other? It's not enough to merely observe a situation. People who understand viability possess the foresight to understand why a situation is happening and what will happen in the future. Let's look at an example. You probably know at least one person who invests in stocks or cryptocurrency. Maybe you even invest yourself. An investor who understands viability will be better able to predict what will happen to a particular stock or cryptocurrency. First, they need to make observations about the business world and current events. Then, the investor can use their observations to foresee what will happen in the future. For instance, If they see a company getting investigated for wrongdoing, they might assume that the public reaction to their wrongdoing will cause the stock to drop in value. When you combine awareness of yourself and others with foresight, you'll be able to think critically and select the best choice in any scenario. In other words, you'll understand the viability of your actions. We can learn more about the consequences of behaving without ethical principles from events in the past and present. The following story is just one example. Please note that there is a content warning for discussions of death related to the COVID-19 pandemic. You may choose to skip ahead using the timestamps in the video description.
Before we go, a few words about the news that broke shortly before we came on the air tonight. An NBC News count showing this country has now reached more than 1 million COVID deaths. Today's soul-crushing milestone comes just as we begin to peek out from behind our masks, lower our guard, willing the pandemic to be over. But the slowly rising tally of the dead won't let it be and forces us to confront some tough questions, like how many of those 1 million deaths might have been prevented. We counted on the tools, the vaccines, the masks, the distancing, but we forgot about the unpredictability of free will, mistrust in science, and simple human behavior.
Let's examine the timeline of events. March 13th, 2020. The Trump administration declares a national emergency in response to the COVID-19 cases that had been spreading throughout the world since late 2019. Across the United States, schools and businesses close while hospitals fill up. Everyone is urged to follow social distancing protocols, though average citizens are discouraged from buying medical-grade masks due to a shortage of personal protective equipment, or PPE, needed at hospitals around the country. Meanwhile, hoaxes and fake medicine spread online as fear of the pandemic spikes. April 3rd, 2020. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control, or CDC, changes its stance on masking and now recommends that everyone wear masks, even if they seem to be healthy. This was done after new evidence linked asymptomatic infections to the spread of COVID-19. Skepticism over the effectiveness of masks begins to grow. Summer 2020. Although the anti-malaria drug hydroxychloroquine sulfate had been tested as a possible treatment for COVID-19, little effectiveness had been found, and the drug was subsequently removed from treatment plans. The anti-parasite drug ivermectin was similarly tested and found to be ineffective in treating COVID-19 in dosages safe for human consumption. However, skeptics of mainstream science begin to turn to these drugs to treat their COVID-19 cases. December 14th, 2020. The first COVID-19 vaccine is administered in the U.S. High-risk individuals receive the vaccine first, with expanded access in spring of 2021. The government encourages vaccination, and many employers introduce vaccine mandates. Those who fear the side effects of the vaccines or are against vaccinations in general react negatively to the vaccine and subsequent booster shots. May 2022. The U.S. reaches the milestone of 1 million recorded deaths due to COVID-19. Researchers from Brown and Harvard universities estimate that approximately 50% of COVID-19 deaths in the U.S. were vaccine-preventable deaths. Though the U.S. governing bodies tried to act in the best interest of public health, the changes in COVID-19 recommendations had a negative impact on the public's perception of what behaviors and treatments were safe. Those who understood the principle of viability were able to adapt to these changes to reach the long-term goal of slowing the rate of infection. Others, who only saw the short-term impact of closures and social distancing, rebelled against these changes or fell victim to misinformation. Unfortunately, this led to illness, hospitalization, and death for many Americans, some of whom were victims of others' denial of the facts. Why do these events illustrate the importance of viability? Let's take a second look. Observational people are able to examine the world around them without bias and come to their own conclusions. People with foresight recognize that not all information shared online is factual, and that some misinformation might be shared to pander to a specific view. They also understand that their perceptions may change as new information becomes available. Why do ethical principles matter in your life? Let's take a look at an example. We've looked at a lot of scenarios where people acted with or without ethical principles. Now, you'll get to decide what to do in an ethical dilemma. Pay attention to the following scenario and think about how you would respond. You've just been elected to the Student Government Association, or SGA, at your school, and have volunteered to plan the prom after party. You've been involved in student government in your previous 3 years of high school, and you're confident that you can organize a successful event. However, a few weeks later, you realize that maybe you've taken on more than you can handle. Your after-school job and college application schedule leave you with little time for contacting vendors, planning decorations, or even comparing color palettes. You know you can't fail here, but you don't want to disappoint the other SGA members or the rest of your school. And the more time you spend thinking about what to do, the less time you have to make a choice. In the real world, there are many ways you could respond to this problem. However, in this hypothetical scenario, you have 4 choices available to you. 1. You plan nothing and hide your struggles from the rest of the SGA until a few days before the prom. 2. You admit to the rest of the SGA that you need help as soon as possible. 3. You reach out to the former SGA member who planned last year's successful after-party and duplicate their event. Or 4. You try to plan the after-party on your own without making any changes to your schedule. Which choice would you make? Take some time to think about your answer. What choice did you decide to make? Let's explore some of the benefits and drawbacks of each choice. If you picked choice 1, you didn't plan anything and hid your struggles from the rest of the Student Government Association until right before the prom and after party. This is the most unethical choice. You knew you couldn't handle these duties on your own, so you didn't demonstrate good observational skills. You also lacked the awareness to understand why others would need to know about your time management problems. Overall, you demonstrated a lack of viability for the SGA position you hold. With this choice, you'd benefit from appearing like you knew what you were doing for most of the school year. Since the prom is in the spring, you'd have lots of time for the rest of the SGA to assume you were competent and had the after-party under control. However, once you admitted to the SGA that you didn't plan anything, you would be in a huge amount of trouble. At that point, the rest of the SGA and the school's administrators would have to try and plan something last minute or cancel the after-party entirely. You'd have to face short-term repercussions such as the angers others would feel towards you, and long-term repercussions such as college recommendation letters being revoked. This could impact your ability to walk at graduation or the chance to attend your chosen college. If you picked choice 2, you admitted to the SGA that you needed help as soon as possible. This is the ethical choice. You used the building blocks of foresight and observation to make the right decision. With this choice, you'd benefit from not letting down the rest of the student body. The SGA would have enough time to help you plan and execute an enjoyable after-party. The other SGA members would be glad that you had the foresight to ask for help immediately rather than waiting to do so. This way, they have the maximum amount of time and money to use for event planning. However, some SGA members might be disappointed that you agreed to take on responsibilities before checking your calendar. You might need to apologize to some people or help support their projects. Overall, those who understand the concept of viability will appreciate that you stepped up and admitted you needed help. If you picked choice 3, you reached out to the former SGA member who planned last year's party and duplicated their event. This choice isn't ethical, but it's not the worst decision you could have made. You were able to observe the conflicts in your schedule, but lacked the foresight to see the issues with copying a previous party plan. With this choice, you'd benefit from getting to attend a successful after-party, even though it would be the same as last year's party. However, the other students and the SGA members might be annoyed that you did this. The other seniors in your graduating class could be especially disappointed, since they'd be attending the same party 2 years in a row. The school administrators might consider revoking the SGA's privilege to plan the after-party based on your lack of effort. If you pick choice 4, you tried to do everything on your own without making any changes to your schedule, but were only able to plan a disappointing after-party. This is an unethical choice. You knew that you weren't capable of planning the after-party by yourself, but you tried to do so anyways. Even though you tried your best, you still wasted time, money, and other resources while doing so, and the event didn't live up to expectations. With this choice, you'd benefit from having an after-party to attend. You didn't slack off or try to hide your struggles, though admitting your faults would have been preferable in this scenario. However, this choice would negatively impact the rest of the SGA members, since they were relying on you to do what you said you would do. You observed the problems with your busy schedule, but were unable to foresee the impossibility of trying to do it all, which resulted in a disappointing event. This could lead to school administrators canceling the event or taking it out of student control in the future. You proved that you were not the right person for the job, and you did not have the ability to fulfill your duties. Which choice did you make? Hopefully, seeing the benefits and drawbacks associated with your choice made it easier for you to visualize how ethical principles can impact your future. When you take time to consider any potential benefits and drawbacks, you will be better prepared to make ethical decisions in real life. Wondering how you can become a more ethical person? Here are some things to consider going forward. How can you create viability in your own life? Take a look at these examples. At school, people who understand viability put their best effort in when completing schoolwork and create plans when studying or working on a group project. At home, people who understand viability complete all their chores on time and take care of their bodies to ensure future good health. While working or volunteering, people who understand viability have a good work ethic and take the time to consider future career choices. It's important to take time for self-reflection. First, ask yourself, have you ever had plans that fell through or a project that didn't come to fruition? What steps could you have taken to ensure viability? Second, consider your environment. How can you help others understand what viability means? Thank you for watching. We hope that you enjoyed this deep dive into ethical principles. This video was presented by MBA Research and Curriculum Center on behalf of the Daniels Fund Ethics Initiative. To learn more, please visit mbaresearch.org or click the link in the video description box below.